Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kip Adams and Ben Wolk with us on this Tuesday afternoon. Fellas, it's G-Day week. It's Masters week. It's a great week for sports in the state of Georgia. A lot to be excited about, and the countdown for those two really big sporting events is down to just a few days. Now, Kip, I'm going to throw it to you first because you had a great start to this week, having a chance to go to Augusta on Monday. Tell us all about it. Let us know what it was like.
Man, there's so many green cups in my living room right now. You wouldn't believe it, but incredible experience. Couldn't have better weather, like 75 degrees, slight breeze. Watching these guys kind of go through the paces. It's really fascinating just to watch, them practicing for this tournament, going to each hole. And once they get to the green, just with their caddy trying to figure out where, because you don't know where the hole is actually going to be. So where it's set up on Monday, I mean, you just assume that's not where it's going to be when you start playing. So they set different pretend tees and try to get the lay of the land. And, just watching that and then just walking, the whole course, just picking a couple guys to pair up with and follow them through the course is really entertaining. I was really lucky to have a friend, Justin, who got tickets to that practice round. Thanks, Justin, for that. And yeah, it's interesting to see what it might be like if you could technically fill up on $10. What it's like to live in, I guess, a bygone era. And I did. I filled up on $10 at least 5 or 6 times. That peach ice cream sandwich, Rusty, if you're watching, you were right. It was everything I thought it would be. And they are still trying to restock the crow's nest as we speak. So good luck to them, and good luck to all the participants and anyone who ever gets the chance. Obviously, take it. It is. I guess I just have to say it's a tradition like no other. So, love the whole day.
I have to ask, how much damage? You don't got to give a number, but how much damage did you do in the gift shop?
I didn't go in with any real sort of plan other than to make the best decisions. It's about an hour and a half wait if you get there first thing in the morning to get in there. And then once you get in there, there's a person who's basically standing there because they let you in basically groups of like 50 to 60. And they have a tablet, and they basically are sensors all throughout the gift shop that let them know how many people are in there. And I'm looking at the tablet, it says 980, and there's like a meter from green to red, and they're waiting for it to go from red, yellow, and right when it gets in green, they let another group in. So the pressure's on. I mean, once you get that green light, it's like, the mad dash. And I kind of looked, I saw where the clothes were. I was like, okay, let's go. I'm trying to make the best decisions possible. I walked out of there with just a couple poles, a pullover, a couple of hats, and barely any regrets. I mean, it still hurt. The carb was smoking on that, but I felt like I had been as disciplined as you could possibly be. And I even, just walking by the coffee mugs, I was like, man, those coffee mugs look great. And I just kept walking. Took everything I had, not to just load up on gnomes, but still, I feel really good about that. That feels like the lightest you could possibly get out of there, having spent a couple $100.
I don't even want to think about what kind of damage I would do in that situation. And with the pressure on, that's asking for a lot. Ben, just how excited are you for this week? We got G-Day, we got the Masters, just a big week ahead.
Yeah, it's a perfect week. I mean, Kip, when we got on before we got on the show, we were asking Kip how things went, and the first thing he brought up was that his calves hurting. So I have got my violin over here to play some sad songs for Kip. We're real disappointed for the experience that he had to go through on Monday, hanging out, watching the solar eclipse at Augusta National, one of the worst places in the world to do it, I'm sure. No, I'm excited for G-Day. I'm ready to talk a little bit of ball. I know that it's, I tweeted about it yesterday. Like the idea that we get to watch a full Georgia scrimmage on Saturday, we don't get it very often. And so when we get those opportunities to do so, it's definitely something that we treasure. So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about G-Day, what we're expecting to see from it, and obviously getting out there on Saturday.
Yeah, we'll get into G Day a little bit later in this episode, but let's start with Georgia's second scrimmage, which was this past Saturday. Passed along some notes to you guys from what we heard, what the Bulldogs were able to accomplish as they were getting closer and closer to G Day. I'm going to start with you, Ben. When it comes to all the intel we heard, all the talk coming out of that scrimmage, what stood out the most to you? What sort of intrigued you the most, especially knowing we're going to get to watch these guys in action come Saturday?
Well, I think, and I feel like I've probably said this multiple times throughout this spring, and I know he was on my preseason or my spring breakout draft that I took as well. But hearing Colby Young's name as often as we do, it seems like every time that there's a scrimmage, every time that there's a big practice, every time that you talk to anybody that was able to get eyes on the Georgia football team working, people rave about Colby Young. And so to get a chance to see him in action on Saturday, I think that's something that I'm really excited about. It sounded like he had another really productive day. I think he caught a touchdown pass during that second scrimmage as well. And so getting to see him up close for the first time, I think is something that a lot of Georgia fans are probably excited about, just because, you know, you don't want to forget about the people that are on your roster or the guys that you already have. I mean, again, Arian Smith is a wide receiver whose name keeps coming up and keeps coming up. And it sounds like he's had a lot more explosive plays and a lot more reliability throughout this spring. And so I think you want to see some of that as well. But anytime you have a chance to see some of these newcomers, and just at a place like Georgia, incoming transfers on the offensive side of the ball are just more primed to be in the rotation earlier in their careers than incoming freshmen are these days. And so I want to see those incoming transfers and what they bring, but Colby Young specifically, just a name that seems to keep coming up, and I want to see him play more.
Yeah, it seems like he really hit the ground running at Georgia, even kind of playing through a little bit of injury to start spring practice. There's a lot to be excited about when it comes to Colby Young. Kip, what about you? What sort of stood out to you about the conversations coming out of that second scrimmage and what we could be watching for once these guys return to Sanford Stadium on Saturday?
I really think, I know that we've talked about as far as position battles, that, you know, the cornerback battle, the fact that it seems like you got three guys really going at it, you know, to see who could be not just cornerback one, but just starting at both ends is still fascinating. But, you know, the inside linebacker group, I just think CJ Allen's had an outstanding spring. We talked about him kind of taking that next step after, you know, a great freshman season, and but at the end of the day, probably didn't like, you know, how he played late in the season and in the postseason. And I think that he's really just been strong throughout the spring, outstanding on Saturday, and has had outstanding practices from everything we've read. So I think just hearing that he continues to take, you know, make strides and get better every week is really promising, because Georgia's defense is at its best when they have elite inside linebacker play. And I think he still has a chance to increase his level of play and be an outstanding multi-year starter for Georgia. And there's also just, you know, hearing more and more buzz out of like Damon Wilson and Gabe Harris. Again, whether it's edge rush, defensive end, you want to hear these guys creating havoc plays in the backfield, pressures. And I think, you know, you're not going to know, even on Saturday, you're not going to really know as far as sacks go, obviously, because they're not going to be hitting the quarterback. But from all we've heard, that both those guys were really strong on Saturday. And I think that bodes well for this defense moving forward. So if you at least see them coming off blocks and you know, getting to the quarterback this weekend, that's an outstanding sign for Georgia for this upcoming season.
You guys hit on most of what I would have harped on from that second scrimmage. I do want to shout out Andrew Paul. I think he's a guy that, you know, I think very fairly, we had a lot of questions about coming into the spring. Just, you know, is he going to be able to carve a role out for himself? What is that going to look like? And it seems like he held up well. But my two guys out of that scrimmage were Daniel Harris and also Damon Wilson. I think both those guys heard a lot of really good things just over the course of spring about Damon Wilson. And then I've put this on our board a few times talking about Daniel Harris. Just looking at him before the Orange Bowl, you know, one of the practices we got to go watch, there have been rumors, okay, he might be going in the portal, and then no, he's not. And so, we go out there, and that's like one of the guys like, okay, let's see if he's out here. We're not entirely sure if he's here. And you see him, and his size at that position, even now, having seen him, through the spring, the few times we've gotten to watch, he just stands out physically. And for him to be able to move the way he can and just the length he has, I think he's got a golden opportunity. Again, I'm of the belief, and I think this is, pretty much standard across the board. None of these primary battles, like we're talking about with cornerback, and I think even the safety spot opposite Malachi Starks, is probably not going to be decided by the time they walk off the field at G-Day. But I think a guy like Daniel Harris is doing quite a bit to present himself as a potential starter and showing, look, I've had a year under my belt learning what it takes. I have physical attributes that not all of these other guys have. I think he's setting himself up really well to where we're going to be continuing talking about this battle going into fall camp. So I want to make sure and talk a little bit. We had some interviews on Tuesday with a few different players, Terrell Foster, Cole Spear, also talked to Malachi Starks and Gunnar Stockton. Just want to share some of the stuff that stood out. First chance really to talk to Gunnar Stockton outside of some of those bowl availabilities, and that would have been 2 years ago during the playoff. And was really impressed with the way Gunnar presented himself. Just at the sort of the bar for a guy going up there for the first time. Usually they're really nervous. You can kind of tell, but he did a really good job of sort of talking about his progress. He talked about the fact that one of the early practices they had this spring, he did not throw an incompletion, and he made it clear, that that's not normal and that's not how the whole spring has been. But he answered some tough questions. He was asked about Georgia going after Jaden Mayava and looking at transfer quarterbacks, and he basically welcomed the fact that there was competition. He welcomed the fact that being at Georgia, I think he said something along the lines of, when you're at Georgia, that's the way it should be. I thought that was really interesting, and to hear him talk about learning behind Carson Beck, trying to show too, not only that he wants to continue getting better, but he said, God forbid Carson gets hurt, I want to prove that I can step up and make the plays. And then looking at Malachi Starks too, you're talking, that's another guy we've talked to this spring that has been limited. He told us that he's been doing a little bit more individual drills as spring comes toward its close. But going through it non-contact, still recovering from that surgery he had in the off season. And it was interesting. We started spring by talking to Smile Munden, a guy who hasn't practiced at all as he's getting ready for the upcoming season. And Smile talked about trying to make the most of it and learning the defense a little bit more, watching from the sideline. And you heard a lot of the same stuff from Malachi. He talked about not only being able to learn from this different role and trying to make the most of it, but he really harped on, he was asked, what is a successful spring for you, knowing that you're not out there, you're watching a lot of it from the side. And he said he wanted to influence the players around him. He wanted to help them get better every single day. And again, I think it's not a surprise. Both of those guys, Smile Munden and Malachi Starks, you'd say that those are two of your leaders on the team. And I think that they really did a very good job of, they're not excited that they're watching from the sideline. They would very much rather be out there with their teammates. But they understand that this is a learning opportunity really for everybody involved, and they want to make the most of it. So I was really pleased to hear Malachi say that. I don't know if either of you guys really got much or got to see much of what was said today, but Ben, any thoughts on just, this, what some of the guys had to say and just as we continue getting closer to G-Day and seeing these guys back on the field?
Well, I was fascinated to see what Gunnar Stockton had to say, just because, we got a glance at him at Pro Day earlier this year, and obviously a lot of eyes are going to be on him on Saturday. And I think that he mentioned, to your point, he was asked about the transfer portal and them pursuing a quarterback, and then also the fact that, they might be looking for more options at the quarterback position. And he was pretty open about it. And you can tell that he is a Kirby Smart trained guy, because he immediately was like, well, Kirby Smart always says that he wants 4 quarterbacks, and that's probably the way that it should be, having 4 scholarship quarterbacks. And so he doesn't look at it as a slight on him or his role or his positioning for any future quarterback battles or anything like that. He just sees it as, this is the way that the room is supposed to be stocked at the University of Georgia. And then sort of piggybacking off of that, he mentioned how many reps that he's gotten. And I think that he tried to sort of dance away from maybe what he was mentioning, because I know that Ryan Puglisi has been in and out of availability throughout this spring, and I wouldn't expect to see him go on Saturday at G-Day. And so I think that he's gotten an opportunity, Gunnar Stockton, that is, has gotten an opportunity. You knew he was going to get a bulk of the second team reps, but I think they've probably given him some first team opportunities. He's probably getting a lot of the third team opportunities as well. And so he's probably working a lot more throughout this spring practice than he maybe anticipated, just because Georgia doesn't have 4 scholarship quarterbacks, and one of those incoming freshman scholarship quarterbacks has been banged up throughout the course of spring. So it's given Gunnar Stockton the time that he needs to prepare. And I think that he sent the message, like, what are you trying to do at G-Day this weekend? And I think he wants to prove that he belongs. He wants to prove that if Carson Beck were to go down for whatever reason, that Georgia's offense wouldn't miss a beat. And so I think that this is his week. This is his opportunity to show everybody why he should be sort of considered the front runner for the 2025 starting quarterback position. And I think he realizes sort of the magnitude of this spring and what it means for him in positioning himself for that future quarterback battle.
Kip, I want to ask you on the Malachi side of this, just the way he's approached this and some of the things he shared. Just what does that sort of tell you about the kind of leader Malachi is? Again, as I mentioned, he's a guy that wants to be out there, but I think he recognizes that he can still be very useful for this team, even if he's not out there getting reps.
Yeah, he's talking up some of his younger players. What he talked about with KJ Bolden, and as far as him soaking up the knowledge, well, that kind of tells you that Malachi's taken on that leadership role and taking these younger players, under his wing. I know it seems weird to talk about Malachi as one of the elder statesmen in the room, but he is going into that year 3, and I mean, if everything goes as planned, there's not going to be a year 4. I think I have my eyes on this year's draft, and I'm looking at the safety board, and I'm like, there's not a first round safety in this draft. And then I'm looking, at next year's draft and going, Malachi Starks could be the first safety out the board and be a first round pick. So I just think for him to be talking about whether it's a safety competition, whether it's, just how he's helping the other players out, and KJ Bolden and Ja'Cory Thomas, it kind of just says a lot about, the fact that he's bought into this culture, the fact that he knows that, how important this season is for him. He wants his teammates to be as well prepared as possible. And it also is kind of a reminder that we haven't talked about Ja'Cory Thomas enough. I mean, just seeing his comments about him, and, the fact that, he just talked about him being a character and loving the game of football. It's just a reminder that if we're looking towards G-Day, that's a guy we have to keep an eye on. I think he's going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out with a couple of the, the biggest plays at G-Day, and kind of has he kind of has that Chris Smith type potential, or a guy that can just be a ball hawk. And I think whether it's Dan Jackson, we're talking about Pope, we're talking about some of the other guys that could be in the mix. I think we have to remember that Ja'Cory Thomas has a chance to really be an impact guy, and I think that Malachi Starks has kind of mentioned that. He's praised him. And I think we need to put some value on that praise and know that this guy might be a really, really good football player this season for Georgia.
Before we take a break, I wanted to shout out some of the folks in the comments. Eric Devoursney Sr. on Facebook, Thomas T-Bone, Elizabeth Grace, Renee Goen, Mickey Brady, all watching and tuning in. We definitely appreciate y'all checking this out as we continue the countdown. And hey, man, we're almost back to watching football in Sanford Stadium. I know we're super excited about that. We're going to take a quick break, come back, and talk a little bit more about G-Day, and then get into a little UGA hoops. Well, as I mentioned before the break, we've got G-Day on Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff in Sanford Stadium, SEC Network Plus, ESPN Plus, if you're going to be tuning in from home. And a few different questions for you guys. I want to start here. Just what is the biggest thing you want to see from this team on Saturday? What is the thing that, when it comes to confidence for this team going into 2024, is sort of the key thing you're looking for? I'm going to start with you, Kip. What in particular do you want to see out of this scrimmage that, if Georgia accomplishes this, you'd say, okay, I feel better about this team going into a new year?
Well, I hate to put a lot of pressure on Carson Beck, but he's going to have it anyway. That comes with the territory of where he is right now and how he's considered. But I want to see him lead the offense down the field. We've heard all along about just how well, whether it's the offensive line or whether it's, you guys talked about Colby Young, but also just, Arian Smith. He's kind of just become, for me, like the most fascinating player. Just the idea of Arian Smith has always been, if he's on the field, every time you see him line up, you just point to him and the ball is probably going to go to him, but you never saw him on the field enough. And so that was always the issue. So if Carson Beck has these weapons at his disposal, I mean, he should be able to do almost, whatever he wants. We're even up against Georgia's defense, which is missing some guys. So even more, I think that you should see a smooth offense. You should see, hopefully for him, turnover-free football. And that's really what I want to see for right now, because I know that this defense right now is not the defense you're going to see this fall, but this is the offense you should expect to see this fall for the most part. They're going to get another weapon in Benjamin Urasek as well. But I think, you want to see him have a smooth day. And like I said, I still think Arian Smith is that guy where I'm like, if I'm asking you guys, what is the potential for an Arian Smith? What does an Arian Smith successful season look like? I mean, do we even know? I mean, we don't know what his ceiling is. And we're talking about, Ra Thomas being healthy, Colby Young, obviously Dominic Lovett. They have big-time weapons in that position room. But if you have Arian Smith out there playing at what we think he's capable of doing, the sky is the limit. I don't even know what his ceiling is. And so that's the X factor. What can he bring to Georgia football throughout a 13 to 15 game season?
Yeah, you think about what a confidence boost it would be for Arian to end a very productive spring with a good G-Day. I think that's a really good choice. Ben, what about you? Is there a particular area of this team or something you want to see on Saturday that, if it comes to pass, you'd say, okay, I feel better about this team as we continue the countdown to the 2024 season?
Well, since I've already brought up Gunnar Stockton, I think I'm really intrigued to see him. And since I've already brought up the offensive transfers as well, I'm excited to see them. I'll bring up something that I haven't brought up as much really all spring, though we've talked about it, is Georgia's defensive line. There's some new bodies on the defensive line. There are some young guys on the defensive line. And then I think there is a group of returners like Nas Stackhouse that want to take that next step forward. And I think that this is a great opportunity to show that. There have been questions. Kirby Smart downplayed it and had to answer a lot of questions about the defensive line recently as well. And so I'm sure they know very well what some narratives are that are out there about them, because once Kirby Smart was asked about it, I'm sure he made it very clear to them what some of the narratives were on the microphone the next day at practice. And so all that to say, you don't get to rush the passer to the fullest degree in a game like this, but I do think it's a chance for you to really punch some people in the mouth in front of a lot of fans. And I think anytime you get the opportunity to do that, even if it's your own teammates, you really get excited and juiced up about the opportunity. So I think that seeing how some of those guys up front are able to move people will be really telling. Now, it's the blessing and the curse of a scrimmage is if the defensive front is making a lot of plays, people are going to be worried. Why is Trevor Etienne or why is Andrew Paul? Why are they not making plays? Why is Roderick Robinson not having explosive runs? Well, maybe that means that the defensive line is doing their part and getting back to maybe a standard that Georgia would like to see when it comes to that run defense. And I think that there are the bodies on the Georgia defensive line this year to have a defensive line that Georgia is accustomed to having and wants to have. I just think that they need to put some of those pieces into place, and sometimes it takes time to do that. And I think that sort of culminating the spring with this spring game and having a really big day along the defensive line, I think will go a long way to just providing some confidence heading into the offseason.
Ben hit on mine with the defensive line, but I'll throw out two groups that I really want to watch. One, running back, because it feels like, that first scrimmage, Kirby really harped on the fact they didn't make enough explosive plays. I think he said they didn't have an explosive run in that first scrimmage. Saw a little bit more of that with Andrew Paul, but want to see just what this room looks like. We've heard good things about Roderick Robinson. Can he come through with a big scrimmage? And you would think, too, especially if it's just Carson Beck and Gunnar Stockton, we may see a lot of running the ball in the scrimmage. So I think that's a big opportunity. And then tight end. We've talked about Oscar Delp. It sounds like he's had a very productive spring. This will be an opportunity for him. But also Lawson Lucky, he was sort of the talk of spring last year as a true freshman. I don't think we've heard quite as much this time around, but I think when you do stuff for the first time, everyone wants to talk about it, and maybe that's just more in line of, hey, he's lived up to what he was able to do as a freshman. But also Colton Heinrich's gotten some buzz with what he's been able to do. Jaden Riddell, obviously, a lot of people have been talking about him going back to Orange Bowl prep. So really interested to see what this offense does, and I think Kip did a very good job of pointing out that this defense is not going to really be representative of what we're going to see by the time the season gets here, because there are guys out, and because we're probably going to see a lot of different guys rotating in. If they were to give up a bunch of points, I don't think that's any reason to panic. I think that I'm really intrigued by the offense and seeing what they're able to do. I wanted to make sure too, and get each of you guys, give me one player that you're really, really interested in watching. It doesn't mean you're not predicting a big game, but it's someone that you're intrigued by. And I'll start, and it's somebody that I believe Kip mentioned earlier. It's Gabe Harris. I think he's got a real opportunity, especially with my number one spring breakouts pick, Ty Ingram Dawkins, being unavailable, for the entire spring. I think that Gabe is a guy that stepped up, and it sounds like he's done a really good job. Again, this is a guy that's just a sophomore. I want to see what he does. And again, that defensive end position, I'm just super, super intrigued what that even looks like, especially when it comes to, is Michael Williams still going to be playing there a good bit? How much is he going to be standing up? And do we even get a sense of that on Saturday in the scrimmage? But I'm going to throw Gabe Harris out there. That's someone I plan on watching really, really closely. Ben, how about you? Is there somebody that just really stands out to you that when you get to G-Day on Saturday, you're really going to be paying attention to?
Well, I'm going to go back to something that Kip said when he was talking about the second scrimmage and the linebacker group, and how I think that, because of Smile Munden being out, they've had an opportunity to, take some leaps forward. And there's been a lot made about CJ Allen and about Raylan Wilson, but I think Troy Bowles is someone that, because he was not an early enrollee and because he was not, able to get in the rotation the way that CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson were. I mean, even last year when Kirby Smart would bring up CJ Allen and how far along he was, he would always say, well, Raylan Wilson, if he hadn't gotten hurt, I think he'd be right there behind him. And sometimes Troy Bowles' name felt like a little bit of an afterthought there. And, I don't think that's as much the case right now. I think that he's had a really good spring. I think that him being able to have an offseason under his belt in the program, getting the flow of things, has allowed him to elevate himself. And again, the opportunities and reps that are there because of Jamon Dumas-Johnson going to the transfer portal and because of Smile Munden being out this spring, everybody has just benefited from that in the room. And I think just he's someone that we haven't seen as much of, but when you hear about Glenn Schumann's room and how it's always so talented and, you're always so impressed by the guys in that room, whenever there's someone that's been around for a little bit, but we haven't seen a lot of, I think this is a great opportunity to see a little bit more from him. So Troy Bowles is someone that I think, I don't know what type of game necessarily to expect from him on Saturday, but I'm really excited to watch it happen.
I think that's a really, really good pick. Kip, how about you? Who stands out to you? Who's a guy you're going to be watching closely?
Well, you know what? One of the things that really stood out last year was, they didn't have that impact guy on the defensive line. And, toward the end of the season, it kind of stood out. I mean, we go back to the SC championship game, they needed guys who were able to, pressure Jalen Milroe, and they weren't able to get the pressure when they really needed it to from their defensive front. had to kind of change it up. And I think, getting guys like Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse back, real big for this team. I think that they're going to be really productive players, but you're going to have guys beyond that. And so with that in mind, I want to see what Christian Miller can do. He is a guy that, got injured during bowl practice, kind of slowed him down early in the spring. Didn't really, didn't hear a lot, but then I think he's starting to, to turn in strong performances as we get closer to G-Day. And he's, getting himself into playing shape. I think he's done some good things. And I think seeing him, play extended snaps and show that he can hold up but also make an impact is going to be huge for Georgia. I think that not just having depth, but having impact depth is something that Georgia, their best defensive units have had on the defensive front. And I just think, we've mentioned Xavier McLeod as being a guy that can have a big role. Jordan Hall going into year 2, obviously can do a lot of good things for Georgia. I just want to see, I think Christian Miller has that chance to be kind of a disruptive player. And that's really what they need at the defensive tackle position. I know he's going to play some snaps at nose tackle as well, but I just think he's a better fit at defensive tackle. And I think having a guy that can, get in the backfield and create some havoc will just be huge for Georgia. So whatever we can see out of him, I'll be watching to see what he can do from snap to snap and see if maybe he can make a couple plays out there and get some momentum going into this fall.
Super excited to see the action. And I want to make sure before we change topics from G-Day, it's going to be a very important day as far as recruits coming into town and getting a chance to check out the Bulldogs. Ben, what can you tell us right now on that front as far as what you're expecting from some of the folks that are going to be coming to Athens and checking out Georgia on Saturday?
Well, as usual, I'll start with the shameless plug of getting subscribed to Dogs 24/7 because we're going to have plenty of recruiting updates throughout the course of this week. As we get closer to G-Day, there will be a more comprehensive list of everybody that is going to be on campus this weekend for the spring game. But already there's some notables that I wanted to call out that are going to be on campus. For starters, we've talked about 2026 quarterback commit Jared Curtis on previous episodes. He's going to be back on campus. He was just in Athens March 23rd when he committed to Georgia. He's already going to be back now this upcoming weekend for his spring game. And so as Georgia still tries to figure out its 2025 quarterback situation, its 2026 quarterback situation is, already sort of taken care of, and he's going to be doing his part helping recruit other guys. I think the most notable recruit that's going to be on campus, or at least that I already am aware of that's going to be on campus this upcoming weekend, is Darren Akinnigbon. And we've talked about him a little bit earlier on in the spring. He visited for a junior day at the beginning of the year and really was open with me in our conversation about being, Georgia being his top school and being a program that he considers the best program in college football. And he hasn't stepped down from that. He hasn't shied away from that. He's a really fascinating prospect to me. He's a true 6'5", 250. He's everything that Georgia wants from that edge position. He's freakishly athletic. We know the success that Georgia had with guys with Nigerian backgrounds last cycle. He's that as well. I also just found out this morning talking with his coach that he was actually born in Italy. So Kip, he might have some travel tips for you here later in the month as well. I might try and check in on that for you after his visit this upcoming weekend. But he's someone that I think is, trending in the right direction for Georgia as it tries to figure out the edge position this cycle. We've mentioned his name. We've mentioned Isaiah Gibson, who committed to USC earlier this spring, and that Georgia is certainly still recruiting very heavily. We've mentioned Jared Smith from Alabama. We've mentioned Zion Grady from Alabama. We've mentioned Marion Dye from Indiana. But I think that as of right now, Darren Akinnigbon and then Bryce Davis from North Carolina are two guys that are really high on Georgia's list. And I think that Georgia's been in a really good spot there. And so getting Darren Akinnigbon back on campus, I believe this will be his last visit of the April window. And then he has an official visit scheduled to Georgia for May 31st to June 2nd. And we've talked about, we know what that means in terms of his priority level at Georgia. I believe that will be his first official visit. So knowing his last spring visit is likely going to be to Georgia, his first official visit is likely going to be to Georgia. I think if you're reading tea leaves, that's typically a good sign there as well. And then another name that I'll mention, just because I know he's going to be on campus, is four-star defensive back Eric Winters. We haven't talked about him as much as some other prospects this cycle, but he's someone that Georgia has recruited heavily throughout. Him and Glenn Schumann have a really, really strong relationship. And I think a part of that is, for a while, Eric Winters, a lot of people were trying to figure out, is he a linebacker? Is he a defensive back? And Georgia has sort of recruited him, in flux throughout the course of his recruitment as his body type has shifted and as his athleticism has changed. And I think that right now Georgia really sees him as a star, someone that would play that star position in the defensive backfield. And Glenn Schumann has maintained that relationship, but he also started to develop a really strong relationship with Dante Williams and Travaris Robinson. He'll be back this weekend. I think Auburn, Miami, Tennessee are a couple of other programs that are in the thick of this recruitment, but I think that Georgia is one that, maybe hasn't been mentioned as much as it should have in this recruitment. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if Eric Winters has a decision by the end of April too. So I think this is a really big decision point for him and making sure that this is a good last visit for him to Georgia before he makes that potential commitment later in the month.
Make sure and go to dogs247.com. Ben and the rest of us will have more intel on who's coming to town and what this weekend is going to look like. As Ben spelled out there, it's obviously going to be very, very busy for Georgia. Well, another group that we might have to keep an eye out for at G-Day, Georgia men's basketball. That was a big visit weekend for them this time last year, and I think it might be the case again. Hoping to spread along some news and notes on who's going to be coming to town for them. UGA men's basketball minute. As of Tuesday afternoon, Georgia's had 5 players go in the transfer portal. Point guard Justin Hill, small forward Jabri Abdur-Rahim, small forward Mari Jordan, power forward Jalen DeLoach, and power forward Matthew Alexander Moncrief. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily surprised by any of these portal entries just based on what I've heard. I will say I thought it was kind of back and forth with Justin Hill. I could see an opportunity for him to come back. But, again, I think he would have been the backup point guard. Perhaps he takes a step down, tries to play some more minutes, maybe at a mid-major. Be very interested to see what kind of opportunities Justin Hill gets. I'll say, too, with Jabri, he is also testing his NBA draft stock, may be headed to the pros, but may also decide to stay in college. The big thing right now, and I posted on the board on Tuesday, everybody's watching to see what point guard Silas Demery Jr. does. Talked to a source really close to him. He has not made a decision yet. I think that's going to come in the next couple days. And I think that this is really going to determine what this offseason looks like for Georgia. I think if you keep Silas, you've got your starting one back. You've got a good building block to work with and try to put talent around him. If Silas does decide he's going to go to the portal and consider other options, you've got a big piece that you've got to replace, and it really makes this rebuild very, very interesting because there's not really, to me, one guy that you could say, okay, we're totally building this team around this guy. I mean, you could maybe argue Blue Kane or Dylan James, but they did not have quite the workload or some of the production that a guy like Silas Demery Jr. had. So going to be watching that very, very closely. Ben, do you have any thoughts just on who's gone in the portal for Georgia and how this offseason is shaping up for the Bulldogs so far?
Well, just from our conversations a couple of weeks ago, I don't think there have been any real surprising names that have entered yet. It was sort of the ones that you were anticipating. I think that with Silas, keeping him, I think Silas, Blue, Dylan, bringing Asa in, I think that's the core that Mike White really feels like he needs to move forward with. And I feel like that's that we all sort of feel like he needs to move forward with. And then build around it from there. I mean, this is just the nature of college basketball nowadays. There's going to be a lot of annual roster turnover. This is not something that is exclusive to Georgia. This just happened with, UConn essentially had to replenish an entire roster from a year ago. They had some carryover, but a lot of what they had in their starting rotation came from the transfer portal. And so it's the nature of it. You figure out who your core guys are and who you feel like you can't afford to lose. You hold on to them as best as you can. and then you replenish whatever you lost elsewhere. And so I think you're going to see Georgia probably try and find some bigs that can play on the offensive side of the ball, because some of the guys that they lost are, those 4 or 5 type of guys that were more the defensive presence, get in there, present some athleticism, get some rebounds. But I think Georgia has been lacking a little bit in big men that can go and get you some buckets. And I think that watching the national championship last night, that's kind of the way of the world in college basketball right now. You got to find a big man that can score, or else you're going to be up against a lot when it gets to tournament time.
Kip, do you have any thoughts just on some of the guys that have entered the portal and what Georgia's going up against as they look at the portal and trying to build for 24-25?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of the, no one's surprised that these guys have entered, and, Georgia has a chance to bring back better players. But I remember hearing the exact same thing last year. The guys that were leaving Georgia's program, you're bringing in Mike White. You're going to be bringing in better players from the year before. It has to happen again. Like, these guys that have left were major contributors, especially if Silas Demery leaves as well. I mean, if he leaves, then the bar just goes up even more for having to actually improve this roster. He won't be able to say that more than likely if he leaves. So, and there's a good chance that happens. So I think overall, you be careful what you wish for when you're seeing some of the guys leave, because I think another year in the program, some of these guys may have been able to perform better for a Georgia roster that hopefully will improve its talent this offseason. So, yeah, sure. I mean, good luck to the guys that left, but if you're Mike White and your coaching staff, you got to get to work, and you got to make sure that you're proving the fans right, who think that Georgia will get better players back in the transfer portal. And I know that they have a chance to get, a couple of guys that look really, really talented. But if we're talking about this again next year, it's a completely different trajectory for the program. So I think, again, it's obviously goes without saying it's a key off season. You think the guys that are leaving because they had that tournament run, that was a big win over Ohio State, something you can build off on. You have to build off of it. You got to keep the momentum going. So best of luck to Mike White and his coaching staff. No pressure.
Yeah, I think Kip hit on it for me. I mean, I've written a couple times now that I think that this offseason is going to be make or break just for his entire tenure, because if you have a really rough third season, I think you're looking at a situation much like Tom Crean ran into, where you went into what I believe was his 4th year, just a mass exodus, and they had trouble bringing in the talent to replace it. And the product was what, a 6-win season, 1 win in SEC play. Like, you have to really maximize this offseason, because especially in the portal era, I mean, we've seen it play out literally in Athens, Georgia. It can get ugly really quickly. All right, guys, I would be remiss not to bring this up before we close out this episode. As we mentioned at the start, Masters tournament gets underway on Thursday. We're all going to be paying attention. Let's be honest. We may have another screen up at G-Day, maybe checking in, hoping, I've seen before in Sanford Stadium, the Jumbotron show, little spurts of what's going on over in Augusta. But I want to get y'all's Masters picks. Who is going to win this year's Masters tournament? I'm going to start with you, Kip. You should have the inside scoop between the three of us. You were there, got to see a little of the start. Who are you picking to win this year's Masters?
Man, okay. Well, you know what? Most of the big hitters weren't actually out there whenever we were going through. Like, most of the pros spent some time, on the driving range, the practice area. Didn't actually hit the course. I mean, I saw a couple guys like Bryson DeChambeau. I saw his caddy out there by himself, just following other guys, taking notes, doing whatever analytics that is required of him at this stage. So didn't really get, insight into any of the guys I think will be playing important golf on Saturday and Sunday. So, I mean, I'll go with a local guy who's playing really, really great golf right now, and Russell Henley. I think, again, I know who the favorites are. I know that, Scheffler is a guy that's going to be on a lot of people's picks as the favorite to win. So I tried to go a little bit off the board here, but I just think he's got a good combination. He's able to drive, and I think you should put a high value on putting play, and he seems like he's got that skill set to be able to come out here and finish great. You want someone who's playing good golf right now. You're at an event like the Masters, and I think a guy that's had top 4 finishes in multiple events. He's playing strong. I know, he's not going to be the guy that, wins the driving contest. But getting on the green and putting, driving accuracy going to be really important, especially if you have bad weather on Thursday, which I think it's expected to have. So I just think, with him being accurate, I think being confident right now, tied for 4th here last year in Augusta. I think he's a good upside play. And, I think obviously it'd be huge for him to win an event like this. So, yeah, I think that's, he wouldn't be the first bet, but he's just my bet because, going off the grid a little bit and then not picking the favorite, which is typically what I'm prone to do, especially when I'm given the first choice.
Ben, what about you? Who you going with?
Well, I'm going to use a little inside tip because our guy Kip was there yesterday. And, a big thing for me at Augusta, it's 1, have you been there, done that at Augusta? And 2, are you getting prepared? Are you putting in the hours that it takes to be successful at Augusta? And Kip let us know who the very first person was that was out on the driving range on Monday morning. And so I would be remiss if I did not pick Tiger Woods to win the 2024 Masters Golf Tournament.
Hey, you tweeted on Tuesday. You came through with not only the NCAA tournament champion, but the NIT champion. So it's hard to argue with Ben right now. I like the way he's thinking, and he's very, very confident. I'm gonna go with Jordan Spieth. One, I've got to show a little bit of fellowship with a fellow Jordan, but he's always played really well in Augusta. I think he's got an opportunity to add another green jacket to the collection. Fox Mulder on YouTube says Taylor Moore is a dark horse. I'd say he was. The odds I was just looking at on CBS Sports, I think he's like plus 20,000. So if Taylor Moore makes a run, everybody remember, you heard it from Fox Mulder. He is all over it.
2 X's, 2 R's.
Love to see it. Well, we're going to close out the episode right there. I appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Be sure, if you haven't already, go to go to dogs247.com and subscribe. Check it out. We've got all kinds of G-Day content coming, and also Georgia men's basketball news with the portal, both entries and some of the guys they are interested in bringing to Athens. Go to YouTube. We've got all kinds of press conferences and also these podcast episodes. And also wherever you listen to this, if you are listening to this podcast, rate, review, follow, be sure, and leave us a 5-star review. Let us know what you think and that you like the podcast. Also, go find us on TikTok. We are over there at Dogs2471. Got lots of good content, all kinds of good stuff coming out of spring, and prepared to have a lot more once we get into the summer months. So we're going to wrap it up right there. For Kip Adams and Ben Wolk, I am Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.